The new FF16 trailer blew loads of minds away. In my case, it was especially because of the music. The choir in the second half is just bananas, and today I essentially transcribed the whole track to figure out what the hell is going on and why does it sound so much like the Final Fantasy XIV composer Masayoshi Soken scored it. So if you had the same hunch as I did, it's actually justified. I'm gonna talk about it in this video analysis of the track. Let's start by listening to it again.
Our foe will not relinquish their mother crystal easily. This will be a bitter fight.
You should not be out of doors.
The first thing we notice here is that this is the first melody we ever heard in the context of Final Fantasy XVI, and it's the Final Fantasy melody. In this case though, it sounds quite sad. Normally it would be major, kind of like this. They changed just a few notes to make it sound way more dark and somber, which I love because this is the first melody we heard in Final Fantasy XVI, and it's also a melody that we're used to hear in major, hopeful, grandiose vibes. This is essentially the composer telling us, prepare because this is gonna be a freaking sad game. Naoki Yoshida is known for having worked on Final Fantasy XIV, which is one of the most mature and darkest Final Fantasy games ever. As an adult, I really like it a lot for that reason. In this case, the music is telling us this is gonna be the same, and I'm all up for it. This is where you start to notice the influence of Masayoshi Soken.
What do you mean you refuse? Did you not pledge your sword to our...
It became much more apparent to me when I transcribed it. It sounds something like this. Which is essentially like the prelude. The reason why I say this sounds like Masayoshi Soken is that this sounds awfully similar to the Crystal Tower theme in FF14, especially because of the strings, which are playing this very same pattern. That should give you PTSD if you played Final Fantasy XIV, because it goes something like... You don't even have to change the chords that much. Like the chord language and the strings pattern that we just heard is the same as the Crystal Tower. Now, you can notice the composer's style in this stuff, like the way he writes the pattern of strings, the way he writes the chord progression, the moods for which it goes, the orchestration, like the instrumentation, stuff like this. Both in this prelude version and in Crystal Tower, you have this big brass that sounds something like out of Batman. This is in the prelude instead. And both have those sort of a string pattern that we just heard. So that's very interesting. This is the first similarities, but wait, there's more. The second similarities of Final Fantasy XIV is heard in the freaking majestic, epic bananas choir part that comes after in the latent trailer.
The legacy of the crystals. Has shaped our history.
So I'm gonna break it down for you because I rewrote this part as well. When you isolate it, it sounds kind of like this. You have this. These are called brass rips. Like that thing right there. That's like going from a lower octave to a higher octave and it creates this sense of like leaping, and it sounds freaking epic. And then you have these strings that kind of alternate. So it's this beautiful dialogue between strings and brass. And then you have the choir part. Man, love it. So it sounds quite similar to two other Final Fantasy XIV tracks, very strongly in my opinion. So how is it made? Well, I want to break it down for you first. You have essentially two voices. You have this, but then you also have this. So it kind of harmonizes, and it's spread over different men choir. This is only men choir, which is very peculiar. You can recognize the composer who wrote the soundtrack also based on what instruments they're using in the orchestra. In the case of Yoko Shimomura, she uses a lot of solo violins and she uses a lot of full choir, men and women. Masayoshi Soken is someone instead who definitely sometimes uses male-only choir to give a darker, more manly sort of vibe to the tracks. You can hear that in Shadowbringers, for example. That's something that Yoko Shimomura really doesn't do. But let me explain you why I say this sounds like Final Fantasy XIV. So you have this choir here, right? Which is actually being layered with brass instruments. If you remove the choir, you might notice that this sounds similar to Final Fantasy XIV in terms of chords. No? You still don't get it? Okay, wait, let me show you what happens if we replace the melody of the choir from FF16 with some Final Fantasy XIV melodies without changing anything else. Let's go. Torn from the Heavens. Fits perfectly. Stormblood. Now, come and tell me that that doesn't sound natural. It sounds like it was made to have the Torn from the Heavens melody and Stormblood on top of it. Why? Well, because Masayoshi Soken is a composer that used this sort of harmonic language very often. In my mind, it sounds that either the person who wrote this trailer music is a big fan of Masayoshi Soken, or Masayoshi Soken himself wrote it, to be honest. That does not mean he's writing the soundtrack for Final Fantasy XVI. He just wrote the trailer music. But, given that this game is essentially led by Naoki Yoshida, who's the main guy for Final Fantasy XIV, I wouldn't be surprised if he actually employed Masayoshi Soken for FF16, which would be fucking amazing. Again, another example of how this fits very well for Final Fantasy XIV can be heard at the end, where you have the prelude playing on brass like that, and the dark, piano and somber choir. If you replace that with Torn from the Heavens, I mean, it kind of fits fucking perfectly. Now, Torn from the Heavens is known to be the favorite Final Fantasy XIV songs that Soken wrote for the game. It's his favorite. So it would be logical to me that since that track is his favorite, maybe he likes to use its harmony a lot, and he likes to use, write in a way that is similar to that track. Seeing how it fits very well in this track makes me feel, again, that Masayoshi Soken scored it. Again, it's not 100% sure, but I have strong reasons to believe that. Oh yeah. This part right here is freaking epic. In this moment, those chords on the brass, I'm talking about these guys, this kind of surprised me, both harmonically and musically, but also in terms of Final Fantasy vibes, because in this specific moment, the way those brass chords are written sound like Hitoshi Sakamoto, composer for Final Fantasy XII, wrote them. So I'm like, that was where I was confused. I'm like, okay, is it Hitoshi Sakamoto or is it Masayoshi Soken? Is it both? Is Soken inspired by Sakamoto? I don't know. I like both composers to death, so I would be happy of any of the two situations. Also, the part that comes after this. Listen to the vocals. So it sounds like the first half, that sounds Latin. But this one, come follow me, come follow me. Come where the crystal is, or come where the crystal leads. I don't know, but it sounds like they're referencing the crystal. Come follow me. Is that Joshua saying follow me to his shield? I don't know. But it sounds like there's some hints to the story in the choir here, which, by the way, it's harmonized. It's like, come follow me, but there's also, come follow me, come follow me. It's something like that. So it's very nicely written. I love the soundtrack.
I'll kill you. If it's the last thing I do.
So let me know if you want to hear the track here that I transcribed. For now, it sounds like crap in my version because I didn't put so much effort into making it sound realistic and to mixing it and stuff like that, because I just wrote it to figure out what's going on in the music. But if you guys want to hear it anyway, let me know. Maybe I can perfect it a little bit and publish it. And Persona 5 Royal video coming soon, I promise. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.